district is kind of like coming home to see so many familiar faces. Thank you, Reverend Gibbs, for your kind introduction. Like many ministers, Reverend Gibbs has numerous duties, taking care of San Diego, Arizona, and his main temple, Pasadena. Just a minor correction on his introduction. My high school class was a little larger than 2. There were 90. But I didn't come close to graduating salutatorian. But I did graduate salutatorian from elementary school, in which it is true there were only 2 students. My hometown of Brogan, Oregon, I love these small town jokes. They had to widen the highway to be able to put a center line down the middle of the highway. We'll always say, the city limit signs of Brogan, Oregon are back to back. You know, I was going to praise the San Diego Temple on this very innovative topic today. I thought, gee, I wonder who came up with that. I guess Ralph takes some of the credit, but I guess everyone else takes credit as well for saying, hey, that would be a good theme for a conference. So allow me to reflect today on your topic of save the date for the Nembutsu, and with Brevin's help, he's going to advance the slides for me. Next slide. Okay, so to me, this theme makes us reflect on the priorities and choices that we make in life. Next slide. So save the date. Save the date. Next slide. So usually we send out a save the date notice for people to keep the date open for a wedding, maybe for a golf tournament, maybe a family get together, or a weekend in Las Vegas. Next slide. But we would never mark our calendars or send a notice out to save the date for something like, next slide, a teeth cleaning appointment. Save the date, I'm having my teeth cleaned in November. Next. Save the date, I'm going to have our house roof done. We would never send a notice like that. And lastly, next slide, for a colonoscopy. Save the date, I'm having a colonoscopy in December. I had one a couple months ago. Everything's okay. Next slide. So let's reflect on the many choices that we face in our everyday life, and some of them are very difficult. Next slide. Like, if you go out to eat, should I order the regular fries, the curly fries, or the sweet potato fries with my hamburger? Tough choices. Next slide. Go out to dinner, gee, should I have the ribeye steak or the seared salmon? Should I eat healthy or should I have the ribeye? 9 times out of 10, I choose the ribeye steak. Next slide. Maybe you're thinking about buying a new car. Should I get a Honda Accord on the left or the Toyota Camry on the right? I would probably choose the Camry. Next slide. But then if you choose the Camry, you have to decide which model you're going to get. Do I get the SE or the XSE or the LE or the XLE? Next slide. Should I pay extra and get the moonroof? Should I get the premium stereo system? Should I get the heated seats? Should I get the all-wheel drive? Next slide. Then you got to pick the color. There's more colors in this. I can only fit 4 on the screen. The top left is Ocean Gem. Top right is called Heavy Metal. The white car is called Ice Cap, and the black car is called Midnight Black Metallic. Next slide. Young people have to make choices as well. When they graduate from high school, should I go to San Diego State or should I go to San Jose State? Next slide. So the choices we make in life can affect the entire course of our life. The college that we choose might result in meeting the love of our life at school. The career we choose might affect where we spend most of our lives and our careers. Next slide. So we have many choices of religions. Hundreds of different kinds of Christianity, Catholicism, Protestant Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Next slide. And there's many choices in Buddhism as well. Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism, Shingon Buddhism, Soka Gakkai, Jodo Shinshu. Next slide. And even in Jodo Shinshu, there are actually 10 different denominations of Jodo Shinshu that you might not be aware of. But here in the US, we only have two, Higashi Honganji and Nishi Honganji. Next slide. So I studied under a wonderful teacher at Ryukoku University, a Professor Takamaru Shigaragi, and he often spoke of the choices that we make in life. And he called it erabi, to choose. He said that we have to choose the path that leads to truth, as opposed to choosing what is false and temporary in life. So he said we should choose the Nembutsu over everything secular. Next slide. So this is one of Shigaraki Sensei's favorite quotations from Shin Buddhism. It appears in the Tannisho, and it goes as follows. You could read along there. But with a foolish being full of blind passions, in this fleeting world, this burning house, all that matters without exception are empty and false, totally without truth and sincerity. The Nembutsu alone is true and real. That's page 679 of that big, thick book, Collected Works of Shinran. Next slide. So don't be too intimidated by this quotation. We're going to look at it a phrase at a time and try to understand what Shinran Shonin is saying to us. Next slide. So a foolish being of blind passions. So who is the foolish being? Well, we are the foolish beings. Foolish means unenlightened, unawakened, to lack wisdom. But normally we don't really think of ourselves as foolish. We may not think of ourselves as brilliant or wise, but still we don't think, well, yeah, but I'm not that smart, but I'm not foolish. But Shinran Shonin says we are foolish. Next slide. So I'd like to share a recent experience I had when I conducted a kieshiki where people receive a Buddhist name. And what I do is they select one word or a Chinese character, and it might be something like compassion or light or heart, from 2 sheets of paper that has all these different Chinese characters and the corresponding English word. And then I select another term or character and put it together and create their Buddhist name. So someone might choose, let's say, maybe they like compassion, and I might put with it the character for light, and so their Buddhist name would be read Jiko, or light of compassion. Next slide. So at a recent kieshiki, the individual had chosen wise. And so I put with that character the character for foolish. So his Buddhist name means wise and foolish. But he didn't know prior to the kieshiki what his Buddhist name was going to be. He had just submitted wise. So they call his name, let's say his name is John Tanaka. John Tanaka, wise and foolish. He's coming up to do Oshoko. He stops in his tracks when he hears wise and foolish. I think he thought it was going to be wise and compassionate or something like that. But I explained to him later that a truly wise person in Buddhism is someone who realizes their ignorance, their foolishness. A truly foolish person thinks they are wise. And Shinran Shonin expresses this in his writings all the time. Next slide. So blind passions are basically the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. Next slide. So I think the best place to experience these 3 poisons is in Las Vegas. No offense to the Las Vegas Sangha members that are here. I always tell people at least 2 or 3 times a year, I have to go to Las Vegas to really experience Buddhism. So those of you who have been to Las Vegas or a casino before, I think you can relate to this. You go, you play a slot machine, and you're doing pretty good, but if you line those 3 sevens up, you get this big jackpot, and you get 7, 7, 7. Ah, so close. Then you play some more 7, 7, 7. Oh, it's so close. It's gonna hit. It's gonna hit. You try. Finally, after a couple hours, oh, I give up. I put too much money into this machine, and you walk away. But you look back. Never look back at the machine you just left. If you leave a machine, walk clear to the other side of the casino. Never look back. Because if you look back, what always happens is some little old lady will walk up and she puts in her money. First spin, cha-ching! She hits the 3 sevens. And you say to yourself, that lady, she hit my jackpot. So you're greedy, you're angry, and you're stupid all at the same time. Such a great way to experience the 3 poisons. But please go to Las Vegas and also attend the service at the Las Vegas Center someday. Next slide. This fleeting world that was in that passage, this burning house. A fleeting world means this transient world of impermanence. And we all have attended funerals where we listen to the white ashes. Life swiftly passes. Life swiftly passes. I turned 71 this year. How did that happen? It's like, oh my gosh, just like that. In the blink of an eye, we're 50, 60, 70, 80. And the burning house refers to how we foolish beings don't see that our house is on fire, that life is swiftly passing, and we act as if we will live forever. And we don't tend to our spiritual side of life. Next slide. So the passage continues, all matters without exception are empty and false, totally without truth and sincerity. This statement sounds kind of harsh, but it is saying that in comparison to the deep and profound truth of the Nembutsu, everything else is temporary and false. In comparison. Next slide. So if we look at this from the standpoint of ultimate happiness, then it might become a little clearer what the Tanisho is trying to say. So what is the source of ultimate happiness for us? Next slide. Is it money? Does money bring us ultimate happiness? Well, it can give us temporary happiness, and of course we need it. I always tell young people, get a good job, make a lot of money, and make a big donation to the BCA, We need your Donna. So it can give us temporary happiness, but how do you react if we fell into a depression? And your money is worth nothing, like happened in the 1930s. People jumped off buildings when they realized their money was worth nothing. Would our happiness be gone? My mom is here. She's 96 years old. She lived through the Depression. She tells me, if we had another Depression, I could take it. I know she's saying that with confidence. Yes, because she experienced it. I don't know if I could take it. See? So, if all of our happiness is on our money, when our money is gone, then your happiness is gone. So you can't say it's an ultimate source of happiness. Next slide. This is our house. It's always a dream to own a house. About 6 years ago, we bought our first house. First house. It's, what a dream come true. But all these years I've lived in a temple house, all these years if something goes wrong, leaky faucet, I just call the church maintenance guys. They come right over, they fix it, just like that. And, Sensei, we also should fix this or that. Now I got to fix it myself or pay somebody to fix it. Next slide. What about our jobs or our careers? Does that provide us with ultimate happiness? Of course, we might be fulfilled when we're working, but what happens to our happiness when we retire or we get laid off? If your whole fulfillment is your work, when you're not working, then your meaning of life is gone. There is a syndrome in Japan called RHS. What do you think that stands for? It stands for Retired Husband Syndrome. Women in Japan go through trauma when their husbands retire. Because all this time they've been a businessman, they've been at work all the time, they come home, now they want breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then they're just getting in the way. And so women have all this stress created by their retired husbands. Next slide. What about relationships? We might think if I meet the love of my life, that's ultimate happiness. Yes, great joy, but don't forget that someday we must part from our loved one. Or sometimes a relationship doesn't work out. And now that great joy is a source of the greatest suffering. The greatest suffering. Was it the next slide? Go to the next slide. Shigerai Sensei, he used to give this message when he would be invited to wedding receptions of his former students. In Japan, weddings are much more formal. They ask a teacher or a boss or someone like that or the person to give a little speech. So Shigerai Sensei would often get invited to the weddings of his former students, and he would always give the same speech. He would get up and he would say, I know today is the happiest day of your life, but I don't want you to ever forget that in life, we are born alone and we die alone. And he sits down. That's his congratulations speech. I could never do that. They would never invite Reverend Marv back to another wedding. But because he's such a person of the Nembutsu, his students all took the message, in a positive manner. He's saying, yeah, you're very happy, but hey, you're not going to be around forever. Your husband is not going to be around forever. Your wife is not going to be around forever. Don't take each other for granted. Don't take your life for granted. Tremendous message. Next slide. What about our health? Does that give us ultimate happiness? It does when we're young and healthy, but what about when we age and have all kinds of aches and pains? Now I got lower back pain, and all this. So, of course, our health is not the source of our ultimate happiness. Next slide. So none of the above provides us with an ultimate sense of happiness. Not money, not a house, not a career, not relationships, not our health. None of them can be counted on to last forever. Thus, they are temporary and false, as Shinran Shonin says, especially in comparison to the truth of the Nembutsu. Next slide. So if we understand that everything in life in the secular world is ultimately temporary and false, then we begin to choose the true and real. We choose the Dharma. We choose the Nembutsu. We save the date for the Nembutsu. Next slide. So all of you here today, you chose the Dharma. You chose the Nembutsu. You could be home watching football. I don't know what the big game today is. You could be shopping at a mall or golfing or playing pickleball, but you chose to attend this conference to listen to the Dharma. Next slide. And so let's look at some of the famous Shin Buddhists who have saved the date for the Nembutsu, who have chosen the Nembutsu in their life. Next slide. This is one of the most famous, Saichi the Myokonin. He's a short man in the middle, one of the most devout followers of the Nembutsu. He wrote hundreds of poems, although he was just barely literate. Next slide. This is one of Saichi's poems. All my cravings are taken away, and the whole world is my Namu Amida Butsu. my blind passions are all taken away, and the whole world is my Namu Amida Butsu. Next slide. None of my evil passions, as many as 84,000, remain with me. Every one of them has been taken away by the Namu Amida Butsu. Next slide. So Saichi, he's not saying that he himself extinguished or eliminated his blind passions. For Saichi, Namu Amida Butsu has taken them away. Meaning, when the Nembutsu has totally entered his heart and mind, his blind passions do not become a hindrance in his life. Next slide. This is Hisako Nakamura, the Helen Keller of Japan. She lived her life without hands or feet. This is a tremendous book. If you ever start feeling sorry for yourself, or you're kind of in the doldrums or down in the dumps, read this book. You will think, oh my gosh, what do I have to complain about? It's just astounding what she went through. Next slide. So, this woman who lived almost her entire life without hands or feet, she writes, with anger, with sorrow, without giving anything in return, I am allowed to live this moment without hands and feet. I look into the mirror of truth and peek through the window of my mind. What a dirty and frightening sight. And even today, this body without hands or feet is allowed to live in the limitless universe. Ah, let those with spirit find joy and happiness in this world. That is my desire. Next slide. She writes, I have them, I have them, I have them all. It's all I need. What a refreshing morning. How can someone without any hands and feet say they have everything in life? They have everything in life. Next slide. These are members of the larger sutra study class that I had at Orange County for over 10 years. The two ladies in the middle are the late Sachi Ochiai and the late Burda Hamada, two of our very devout followers of the Nembutsu. Next slide. So Burda Hamada, once I asked her this question, I knew what she was going to say, but I thought I'll ask her anyway. I said, Burda, if you had your choice between $1 million but no Nembutsu, or the Nembutsu but no $1 million, what would you choose? $1 million or Namu Amida Butsu? She said, oh, Sensei, that's easy. That's easy. I would choose Namu Amida Butsu. See, if I ask myself that question, I have to at least pause for a few seconds. $1 million, gee. For her, no hesitation. She said, why are you asking such a dumb question? She didn't say that, but to her, it's just absurd. Of course she would choose Namu Amida Butsu. She chooses the truth over the secular. See? Next slide. And so Shigaraki Sensei, coming to the closing here, he writes, in our ordinary lives, we always think that our parents, our children, our husbands or wives are our most important treasures. Or we feel that fortune, fame, and social status are the most important values that we have. Thus we busy ourselves throughout our daily lives, trying hard to obtain such values or to protect them. However, are these really the most important things in our lives? Is it not true that all of these treasures and values will eventually fade away and crumble? Not one of them, we come to learn, is ultimately true and real. Every single one of them is actually empty and false. Next slide. The Nembutsu, which Shinran teaches us, is the Nembutsu that we say in our daily lives, as we realize keenly and deeply that no worldly values are either thoroughgoing or true. Or, stated conversely, as we say the Nembutsu, we come to realize that all worldly values are false. And based upon that realization, we come to comprehend even more that the Nembutsu alone is true and real. This is what it means to live the Nembutsu. Thus, the Nembutsu as taught to us by Shinran Shonin is the Nembutsu of choice, something that we choose. Next slide. And so that is how we save the date for the Nembutsu, that is how we choose the Nembutsu, the Dharma, in our life. Thank you very much for listening and attending today. Naman Nembutsu, Naman Nembutsu, Naman Nembutsu, Naman Nembutsu, Naman Nembutsu, Naman Nembutsu.